Good afternoon. Am I audible? Yeah. A very warm welcome, ma'am, and Ashok. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to discuss a very important topic. The government has not only been talking about digitalization and taking a lot of services to the end customers, which are basically the citizens of the country, and they have done that in perhaps a lot of spheres, and they have done it reasonably effectively. Obviously, one of the key anchors for something like this to be successful was the cloud strategy. That has been there for a long time, but in the last few years it's been propelled quite a bit. If I can start with you, ma'am, you have since a very long stint that you had at NIC, which was basically the nodal agency for a lot of computerization and automation that was happening across a range of government departments and ministries. So I would like to request you to start by telling us about some of the success stories where the cloud strategy really worked, and then maybe subsequently you could talk about what are some of those areas which you feel perhaps did not do as well as some of the other areas. So if you could start with you, ma'am.
Thank you. As you know, I was with NIC for over 36 years and for last 6 years as its DG. And that was perhaps the time this cloud and its whole tech itself was kind of at the core of everything government was doing. And NIC as an organization not only builds digital solution, also provides digital infrastructure for the government, which has a long history of providing communication networks to going forward to data centers and cloud. So 2014 government had through NIC had set up its own cloud called Meghraj, which was kind of supporting, and NIC basically hosts most of the government applications which you see or services, it gets powered through those data centers and cloud. And because it was the cloud set up by NIC, managed by NIC, so those typical apprehensions which people earlier have when they were trying to move to cloud was not there, because to government premise it was there, managed by the government people and the same set of NIC people who were earlier. So its adoption of the cloud was phenomenal. In fact, you'll be surprised that when we wrote a letter, secretary wrote a letter to every government department you can use. The demand of cloud became so much so that we in between had to tell people to now
slow down,
because we didn't have that kind of a capacity ready. Why it really became popular was because it took away all that effort of the government officials of making files, procuring hardware, getting into those RFPs, sizing, and then when you're sizing for 5 years, but you do not know your theoretical number of users could be, let's say, 100 million, but you do not know at what pace the whole application will be adopted. So all these things used to make those procurements quite time consuming and quite a tricky phenomena. With this cloud, you have ready to use infrastructure which you could put more requirement almost at any time. It kind of changed the whole paradigm. And as a result, the Under Digital India program, which was launched by Honorable Prime Minister in 2015, whatever new programs after that, whether it was Swachh Bharat Mission was the first time when we kind of get into that level where directly citizens could apply for the subsidy for toilets and all and submit data right from that panchayat or village level onto. So that is a kind of a web scale system had to be done. Or maybe it was housing for all, where housing had to be given to Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Then moved on to something which is fertilizers, which is not only the subsidy but the complete supply chain of fertilizer, right from generating a demand to through a POS machine, ultimately distributing fertilizers. So all these systems, if you see, they are born digital. Right from their concept, when the scheme was being conceptualized, the gap assessment, right from that stage, technology was used. And it also brought, because it was a cloud and it could be made accessible to whole of this, prior to this when you used to have program, and when you have programs, you have each state. So there used to be different instances of softwares working for different states. With this cloud, because you could scale and you could also give them, we brought this concept of one nation, one platform kind of thing. And today, I recently have compiled a publication which we said 75 digital solutions from NIC. All of them are national level platforms. Even e-way bill, which many of you must be using, where for all this companion to GST. Then we came with this e-invoice, where you get a unique number of each and every invoice of yours and the complete tracking, and as a result your GST submission of that GST compliance and all becomes much far more easier. So huge variety of this thing, and cloud played a very big role, because the cycle, earlier you today think of a thing, it used to take perhaps 6 months by the time you will launch that thing. This times I remember there are sometimes we have not been even given a month to launch. One side is open source, which was playing its miracle. You don't have to procure any licenses. Just develop the software and you are kind of a step ahead. It happened so much so by the time in the last 2 years, we came up with, which again because of the cloud, with two very distinct set of services. One is website as a service. So today if you want to do a website, you don't have to do any procurement. Just go there, all templates, typical components which government websites are already done. Just configure them and your site gets ready, no security audit, no DNS, nothing there. Similarly for the service part of it, normally what will the government service generally will be, you apply a form, you give in your input, attach some documents, do some Aadhaar authentication, make some payment, and your application is done, and then after that you've been kind of given that service. You may have various approvals and all. So we have come up with a component called Service Plus, which is again on cloud, where any state government can configure its service without writing. It's a low code, no code platform. Without writing the code on the cloud itself, you can configure your service and your service is up. Okay. So states like Haryana, Karnataka have really leveraged this, and hundreds of services they have launched in months kind of a time. One of them got even Prime Minister's Excellence Award. And both these products, I am so happy, the month I was leaving, both have got this WSIS UN award. Both the products have got award, and they really changed a lot of things. But all underneath it was cloud, which enables you to scale things practically at any point of time, and you can also shrink them back whenever it's not needed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest advantages, scaling up and scaling down at very, very short times. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ashok, you have been tracking this cloud implementations and cloud strategies of the Government of India and e-governance services. So what's been your observation about this?
Okay, thank you so much for asking this. So yes, we have been tracking, and I'm saying this not as a nationalist or a proud Indian, but when you compare what India has achieved in the last couple of years, alluding to the programs that ma'am was referring to, the most recent one is the CoWIN itself. The way the CoWIN app has shaped up would not have been possible had there not been an underlying cloud infrastructure. GST program, ma'am talked about it, e-way bills. So the kind of government schemes where the government has changed the focus on the end consumer, end citizen, how can we make their life simple, better, and to make it more relevant to them, the whole infrastructure required, the speed at which it needs to be deployed, along with the security components. For a country like India, cloud is the only way out, and the way we have adopted and the way government has helped becomes very, very important. Before I hand it back to you, I want to correlate that to the point the previous session made in terms of the role the industry played in the cloud adoption. Just because the industry pushed and encouraged the government for faster services, better services, integrated services, the government actually stood up and took note of it and very promptly moved towards enabling the industry.
You also mean industry as a user?
Industry as a user, exactly, right? So,
yeah.
So for a country to grow at the rate at which we are growing and to grow further, GST had to be done. It had to be done fast. Income tax processing had to be done fast. Services had to be delivered fast. And all of this is possible only when you have highly scalable underlying infrastructure. Yeah.
So coming back to you, or maybe Ashok, you could answer. So we heard about some of the great examples where cloud was really able to make things happen. But I'm sure there are areas which are lagging, which have not been able to really pick up. So what are some of those areas and what could possibly have gone wrong there?
I wouldn't use the word gone wrong. There are still areas that the government needs to do. Particularly, for example, when it comes to today, the primary cloud providers, there are 3 very popular cloud providers whom we almost all
go to.
Go to. And that, according to me, is a problem, right? So we need to have a wider flavor available. And coming back to Meghraj itself, why can Meghraj not be scalable enough to support not just the government businesses but also private sector businesses? Is that possible? That's something to consider. Second thing that I would like to leave on the table is a unified security policy, especially with the globalization of our industries becoming more global, data becoming more accessible across the borders, and the kind of threats that we are facing. Security policies becomes very, very crucial, and that is something that if we can work together with the industry and the government to ensure that we not just define a policy, but the policy has to be real, applicable, and applied. That's I would like.
The government has been sitting on a data policy for a long time, but I guess the final decision, is still work in progress.
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Varma.
View on this.
Yeah.
Complimentary, not onto this thing. So first thing, industry has been a big supporter even when we are doing cloud, whether it is enablement in terms of provisioning of those infrastructure or in terms of provisioning that kind of a skilled manpower, because all these activities really you need to have these things available to you, and which we have been really supported by industry all through our journey. As far as if you're saying what has worked, what has not worked, see, I mean, in Meghraj we have capacity, but obviously being into government setup, you cannot have those infinite kind of capacities. But at the same time, there are incidences when in government, typically there'll be applications who will see peak, let's say once a month, once a fortnight, or once in 6 months. Some applications will only go peak once a year, kind of these things. Now, it does not really also make sense to put infrastructure which will be good enough for that 10 times in a year's kind of a use. So, at sometimes you would, and we also know that we have now a good cloud infrastructure available by the industry, by global multinationals, as well as players, Indian industries also kind of coming up. Few years ago with Mighty, we had done this empanelment of agencies, who had gone through various certification for various kinds of services and all. And I have been party to many of these use cases. In fact, sometime I can write a book. Each of these experiments where people have tried to use this public cloud, somewhere in between they have got stuck, and it was not a very happy kind of a situation. Sometimes we could wriggle them out, sometimes we could not, also kind of this thing. So essentially, what is needed. So one thing which is clear, that if you really want to do everything hyperscale, and considering you have this much of a capacity available within the country, hybrid is the way to go. But hybrid is not something कि आज मेरा application फंस गया तो I will today go to Amazon, or I'll take any of the cloud and push it. Your application inherently has to be designed to be moving so that you seamlessly not only can go to the public cloud, but you can also come back when your peak is over. For that, I think we need to come up with the framework. Government is understanding it's needed, but I think all these cloud service providers also have to engage with to come out with this thing, because it is not only simply moving, you need to take care of security, you need to take care of all those data compliance requirement coming up. So that hybrid is one part, I think, which really has to happen, where seamlessly you go and seamlessly you come back. While being at rest, there's no problem. My data has been all through, at rest, in transit, and in use every time encrypted, so that I not really have to worry. That is one aspect. Second thing is, see what is happening, you do a contract through a cloud service provider, which could be 3 years, which could be 5 years. After that, how do you ensure that you can have the same this thing? So the procurement model today is something which is not really, and then cloud, what is the advantage of? One of the advantage of cloud is that it has a very dynamic pricing. Depending on what's your load, depending on what's the current infrastructure, prices changes. Whereas typically the way we do procurement in, I think, public sector also, but typically in government is a kind of fixed rate contracts, which is then going to be there for 3 years or 5 years. So you kind of lose on things. And so the whole procurement model for cloud has to evolve. I mean, it's not change, the model is not there, I should say. And that is the reason very often we are into those meetings try to find out things. But I think we need to understand this is a different order of procurement and different model has to be there. Third thing, what happens, whenever, because data protection things are there. So government departments will typically feel, I mean, if supposing they want to go to cloud, they want someone else to say, ki tum chale jao, it's kind of safe. How will I say? I also do not. So, I mean, I have been saying this quite some time that every department, and it's something MIT has been giving guidelines, but every department has to understand what is the kind of information they are using, or they are possessing, and how should they, and what is the nature. Is this very highly sensitive information, personally sensitive information, not so sensitive, or it is in public domain? Once you've classified your information, then you can come up with the kind of a framework which anyone can give, whether it can go to public cloud or it cannot go to public cloud, or if it has to go to public cloud, it has to follow this level of encryption. That technology, but I am sure industry will support and we all can do. But basic classification of the information which you are processing as a department, that has to happen. Because once you have, so everybody knows this information falls in class 1 category, so it's fit to go in any public cloud. If it is class 2, it gets class 3 means it has to be on-prem. All that can work. So if these 3 things happen, I think government will be really able to not only leverage the industry developed cloud, and it will also be able to maybe further fast track the services which we are giving it to citizens. These things which you hear, लास्ट दिन इनकम टैक्स के प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है, टैक्स नहीं भर पा रहे हैं, जीएसटी में भी आता है. So all those things perhaps can be made, olden time things if you could just do.
I think very, very important and relevant points, and I am sure you have sowed the seeds in the generation that you have left behind to run NIC, and I am sure those would be considered for future growth. So I wanted to come on this subject of data centers being established in India, especially hyperscale data centers. It's a huge market, but still we depend on those 3, as you said. Security is the other issue that is, even after so much of development in terms of science and technology and standards, I think security is still is a concern for everybody. So on security, as well as having our own data centers, having India being, people sometimes say, why can't it be the data center capital of the world or something like that? So what is it that, what are your views on these 2 issues?
Okay, with your permission also. So can India...
We will, after that, we will keep 5 minutes for Q&A also.
Sure. So can India be the data center capital of the world? I don't see a reason why not, right? Should it be? Absolutely. Why? We have the largest target population that we are dealing with after China, so there is no reason why we should not be able to do that. So what is hindering us are, according to me, primarily 3 things, right? One is, of course, the core basic infrastructure, power being available at even the previous panelists talked about power being available, regular power, constant power. Second one is the capital investment that needs to be done. Today, the 3 hyperscalers have the kind of money to invest, and that is where the government can play a significant role in helping Indian industry set up those data centers. That is 2. And third, according to me, and probably very, very important, is going back to ma'am's point of skilled capability available to own, set up and run and manage that infrastructure. So setting up, it can be done, but it has to be sold, it has to be consumed, and it has to be maintained. So these are three reasons which are sort of holding back despite that, there are a lot of players today who are setting up data centers. Can it scale? Absolutely, and that is where the government and industry can come together. Okay, ma'am.
See, I believe that we are already moving towards becoming data center and cloud nation. Very fundamental thing, we are one of the largest, I think world's 1/6 or even more than that, the consumers in our country. So it's definitely a kind of a very, very huge opportunity, I should say. And they are constrained, and therefore if you see in the recent, even COVID times also had so many data center parks coming up. The physical infrastructure have started coming up. People have kind of opened. Now you definitely need investments in terms of IT infrastructure, in terms of so to say power and all those things, because data center is a big guzzler of power onto it. So I don't know whether you've noticed, MIT had introduced this data center policy, in which they have worked out some incentives for the data center industry, realizing that we need to promote this. I think that paper is already consulted, and now this policy is moving towards cabinet to become a policy. In the union budget also, finance minister hinted for data centers to be categorized into infrastructure sector.
Yes.
So your loans and financing become. So I think if these things start getting in place, it will be little easy for.
But it has not been accepted, I
yes,
think.
because it's a part of, it's a process,
Yeah,
which is the data
yes,
center infrastructure
Yeah.
policy, which is kind of data center policy, which they are calling. So that will kind of help. Second thing, we also, data centers also create a lot of carbon footprint. So, and our Prime Minister has already kind of said that we'll be 50% onto this. So this lot of investment is alternate sources of energy, whether it is solar energy or hydrogen energy. This is again going to contribute in a big way in terms of data centers going forward, because you will not have that burden of carbon footprint. So these two things put together, I think, and the workforce, we have to really make it ready, because it is actually not data center. Ultimately, cloud industry, we have to become cloud hub. You have to, everybody is moving towards as a service, everything to be available as a service. So we need a huge workforce. So situation, opportunity is huge. If we all work together, whether it is, I was really happy yesterday, announcement was there, 25 lakh children to be given AI internship by our Honorable MOS. So I think if these kind of initiatives come from academia, come from this all education startups who are reskilling, because a lot of our workforce, which was in this BPO segment, can be easily reskilled and brought into these kinds of things. With all these things, and I think if the policy happens, I am very confident that we will be the cloud service provider to whole of the country, because everything is in our favor. The consumer, our geography, the kind of span we have, and the kind of vibrant industry we have. We are also building applications for the other countries, the other industries. So situation is good, and I am looking forward to those days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please, you wanted to say something? Yeah, so we can take maybe one or two questions, and if there is still time, I have one more question for the panel. Otherwise, there's one or two questions from the audience. Questions or comments or remarks or. Okay, so I have 2 more minutes, and so let me very quickly ask you about the rage of the industry today, which is artificial intelligence and analytics and all. So do you see, I'll start with you, Ashok, do you see that being also leveraged as the industry gets into the top gear of cloud, and so do you see that also getting leveraged, some of these technologies which can actually propel the usage of cloud and
Short answer to that question, an absolute vehement yes, right? And it's very, very logical. If you look at the private sector industry today, they are already using it. If you see your e-commerce websites, they're very, very prompt in leveraging your data that you willingly give to them, right? So that's one part of it. But when you look at the government as well, with the amount of data that they have collected from the simple example of the CoWIN app itself, today they have enough data to do phenomenal amount of scientific assessment of disease spread patterns and make sure that the public health setup is geared up to meet hopefully not similar challenges in the future. So is analytics going to drive cloud adoption? Absolutely yes, both in the public sector and the private sector. Again, the only underlying challenge I go back to is the fine line between privacy, security.
Which
How
will-
do we
yeah, for
how do we
which-
manage
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Right. So that's the only thing that is going to stop, if at all, or rather slow down the adoption. But otherwise, analytics is here to grow, here to benefit the citizens of the country, and our underlying infrastructure will obviously cloud will drive the whole thing.
Dr. Varma, you.
We had done this application called Arogya Setu during these things. This was a classic example of using data science and AI and locational services to be able to kind of give you your risk score in terms of obtaining credit. During that time, you must have also seen the help of a lot of companies, especially consulting companies, who helped us doing this beautiful dashboards, because all that time this had to be seen by people at the minister's level and all. So how data could be used to not only give you those dashboards but also generate insights. Many a times this data through analytics was used to identify which is the next hotspot, which is the next containment zone, and things like this. So it has also brought to the administrators the power of data, that how this data get, and therefore, being into that thing, I have personally seen that the demand for data analytics has really grown many ways. Every time we are talking of any new system, there's always a question that how are you really going to do data analytics? Dashboard has also become an old thing now, that how can we generate some insights, a real-time analytics, so that, because what happens, typical case will be the two cases I'll tell you. One is we have, let's say, this MG Narega program, which is been working, which has, crores and crores of citizens. And when you have this kind of a program and continuously applications are coming, you are, and lakhs and crores of subsidy being distributed. If you don't do this rightly, or if you do it rightly, it can really impact millions. So data science can help you identifying the right beneficiaries and transfer of money at the right time. Look at scholarship. If the child doesn't get in the beginning of the session, it loses this thing, but making it right, technology and data science can really help those. There are many more examples. Second thing is, how do you really control this pilferage or analytics? That's another component where analytics is going to play a huge role coming forward. So I think, as I said, AI and data analytics is going to be the key thing. Like we used to have Intel inside, it has to be AI and analytics inside. This will be everywhere, and clouds will again play an important role, because both of these application technologies require huge computing resources, which is not affordable for every application to kind of have it, and you need it for a shorter time when you're building your models and all. So that is again, and that will be basically possible because of these GPUs, supercomputing, and particularly cloud output.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. I think it was a very short but very enlightening session. One it's a personal question, but I'm sure everybody would be interested. So, hopefully COVID is gone. What about Arogya Setu?
So Arogya Setu itself has transformed into a health app now. So today you can go to Arogya Setu. You can first of all schedule your COVID, because third booster dose is going on. You can download your certificate and show it anywhere. More importantly, you can create your health ID through this thing, which is called ABHA. It has introduced. So it is, actually, if you remember the Arogya Setu name when we were giving that time, it was always felt that post-COVID, because it will have a traction, it will be one of the main app for the my health records on it. So that UHID, it is doing a wonderful job that way, and people are using it. And I really look forward to Arogya Setu being a place where I can see my longitudinal health record over that time, which is becoming
so all the controversy and apprehensions about Arogya Setu will hopefully
that
go
part
away.
We are switching it off. That location and all, we are switching it off very soon. So that should not be.
Well, thank you so much, and it was a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ibrahim sir. Thank you, Ibrahim sir, for the session. May I request you to hand over the mementos to our esteemed panelists?